I mean, think about it. In what other profession on earth could a humble janitor entirely destroy a Harvard-educated elite?
Right. Just doesn't happen anywhere else.
No, it doesn't. You wouldn't hand a scalpel to a janitor over a highly trained surgeon,
Definitely not.
and you wouldn't ask them to, engineer a skyscraper over a veteran architect. But in the financial markets, this exact scenario happens every single day.
Yeah, and it completely defies everything we are taught about meritocracy and expertise. And it's exactly what we are dissecting today in this deep dive into the psychology of money.
Right.
The sources we're looking at make an incredibly compelling argument. Basically, that financial success isn't a hard science like physics or math. It is, it's a soft skill.
And the mission today isn't to just look at another bulleted list of what to do with your money.
Hmm.
I mean, if you're listening to this, you likely already know the fundamentals.
Right. Buy low, sell high.
Exactly. You know you should save more than you spend. The real question these sources answer is why we fail to do those basic things when the pressure is actually on.
Because raw intellect clearly isn't the deciding factor here. I mean, if it were, the people with the biggest spreadsheets and the highest IQs would always win, right?
Yeah, they'd never lose.
But they do. So to understand why the janitor can beat the financial whiz, we really have to look at where financial decisions are actually being made. We have this illusion that they happen in a vacuum of perfect logic.
Right, like staring at a perfectly organized Excel grid.
Exactly. But the reality is they happen in highly emotionally charged environments. They're made at the family dinner table while, passing the mashed potatoes.
Or in incredibly tense corporate boardrooms.
Yeah. And the mechanics of why those environments are so detrimental to pure logic, well, it comes down to evolutionary biology.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that is a big jump.
It is, but think about it. When you're sitting at a boardroom table facing a massive market downturn, your brain isn't calculating compound interest.
No, it's panicking.
Right. It's processing personal history, ego, pride, and these highly complex social incentives. The fear of looking foolish in front of your peers totally overrides the math.
It kind of feels like we're trying to run a highly complex modern software program, the modern financial system, on hardware that just hasn't been upgraded since the Stone Age.
That is a great way to put it. What's fascinating here is that this evolutionary mismatch is the core issue. The sources bring up a brilliant comparison with domesticated dogs to explain this.
Oh, right, the dog analogy.
Yeah, so dogs have been domesticated for roughly 10,000 years, right? But they still circle the rug before they lie down.
Because that wild survival instinct is just baked into their DNA.
Exactly. Now look at human beings interacting with modern finance, index funds, 401ks, digital credit cards. I mean, these things have existed for maybe 50 years.
So we are essentially wild animals walking into a casino, pretending we know how to calculate probability.
Yeah, pretty much. And worse, we suffer from massive cognitive dissonance after we make a, biologically driven emotional panic decision. We try to rationalize it.
Right, we tell ourselves a convenient story.
We talk about macroeconomic trends to justify why we sold at the absolute bottom, but it's just pure psychology driving the bus.
And because that biological hardware is so susceptible to narrative, we constantly misjudge the invisible forces that actually dictate outcomes. The sources highlight two specific forces here: luck and risk.
Yeah, the text describes them as doppelgangers. They are two sides of the exact same coin.
We just treat them entirely differently based on our ego, don't we?
Oh, 100%. When we win, we call it skill and hard work. When we lose, we blame bad luck. But the mathematical reality is that every outcome in life is guided by forces completely outside of individual effort.
Let's look at the mechanics of that, because the sources point out something wild. They say sibling income is more highly correlated than height or weight.
Yeah, which sounds completely counterintuitive at first.
It really does.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have a wealthy, tall person, the math actually says their brother is more likely to be wealthy than tall.
It sounds absurd until you break down socioeconomic momentum.
Yeah.
Wealth is just so deeply tied to the ZIP code you were born in, the stability of your household, the school your parents could afford, and, the early network you were handed.
The unseen advantages.
Right. Those early advantages compound so aggressively that they mathematically outweigh genetics like height.
Wow. It really forces you to check your ego. But, I mean, if we accept that a massive portion of our outcome is governed by luck and risk, things that are entirely outside our direct control, What mechanism is left that we actually can control?
Time. Time is the one lever you can pull. And this brings us to the Ice Age analogy in the text, which I think just completely reframes how we view momentum and wealth creation.
Okay, yeah, walk us through the Ice Age thing.
So we intuitively picture an ice age as a cinematic disaster, right? Like the sudden global blizzard that freezes the mammoths overnight.
Right, because our brains are just drawn to the dramatic narrative. We want the movie version.
Exactly. But geologically, that isn't how it works at all. Ice ages actually happen because of a slightly cool summer.
Just a cool summer.
Yeah, just one summer where a thin layer of snow from the previous winter didn't completely melt, and that tiny layer of leftover snow reflected just a fraction more sunlight away from the Earth.
Which made the next winter a little bit colder.
Right, more snow accumulated reflecting more sunlight, and it just compounded over thousands of years. The profound lesson here is that you do not need tremendous force to create tremendous results.
That is super powerful. I do have to push back on behalf of human nature, though.
Go for it.
We know intellectually what compound interest is, but biologically, our brains are wired for linear thinking, not exponential thinking.
Okay.
We want the massive stock win now. We want the sudden global blizzard. Snow that didn't melt looks incredibly boring to an ape brain that is wired for immediate dopamine and immediate survival.
You're touching on exactly why people abandon sound financial strategies. Because exponential compounding takes decades to show its massive results, people just naturally dismiss it in the early stages.
Yeah, they look at a 1% gain in their portfolio, and their brain cannot intuitively map out what that 1% will look like over 50 years.
So they get impatient. They look for faster, riskier solutions to force the result today.
Which completely destroys the one thing required for compounding.
Survival.
Exactly, survival. You have to stay in the game long enough for the Ice Age to happen.
Right. So if impatience is our default biological setting, how does someone actually fight that biology? We have a perfect historical anomaly to look at here in Warren Buffett.
Oh, yeah. The text goes deep on him.
There are thousands of books analyzing Buffett's stock picks and his math, but the text argues almost all of them miss the actual point. The book about him should really be titled, He Invested Consistently for 3/4 of a Century.
Because his longevity is his actual genius.
Yeah, from age 10 to well into his 90s, he just survived. And what the sources make clear is that getting wealthy and staying wealthy require two entirely different, almost contradictory mindsets.
Right. Getting wealthy requires optimism. You have to take risks, you have to swing for the fences, and you have to believe the market will go up.
But staying wealthy requires extreme humility, frugality, and paranoia.
It's an incredibly difficult psychological tightrope to walk.
Yeah.
You have to be aggressive enough to capture the upside, but terrified enough of the downside to never get wiped out.
Because getting wiped out resets the clock on your compounding back to zero.
And to survive, you have to understand the math of tail events. In finance, in business, even in art, a tiny minority of events at the absolute tail end of the distribution curve drive the vast majority of outcomes.
Venture capital is the perfect model for this, right? You fund 50 startups knowing that 49 of them will likely fail or just break even.
But the one that becomes the next Amazon pays for the entire graveyard of failures.
Exactly. The sources also mention Netflix hits, like Orange is the New Black. Reed Hastings understood that to get the one culture-shifting mega hit, you have to endure dozens of flops.
Even Buffett himself owned something like 400 to 500 stocks over his lifetime. But almost all of his accumulated wealth came from just 10 of those picks.
Just 10.
So what does this all mean? It actually is an incredibly relieving concept. It means you can be wrong half the time and still win.
You don't have to be perfect. You just have to survive your mistakes.
But I think society suffers from massive survivorship bias here. We look at the billions Buffett made, we look at the 10 massive wins, and we try to copy those specific bets.
Yeah, we focus on the wrong thing.
The sources argue we should really be studying what he didn't do. He didn't leverage himself with massive debt. He didn't panic and liquidate his portfolio during the 14 recessions he lived through. And he didn't attach his ego to a single strategy and burn out.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the overarching goal of investing isn't necessarily finding the mathematical edge to beat the market by a fraction of a percent every year. The goal is simply not going bankrupt.
Right. If you can engineer your financial life to be unbreakable, the compounding will eventually happen.
That raises a crucial question, though. If the ultimate goal is just surviving long enough to let money compound, what is the reward we are waiting for? I mean, we aren't just hoarding numbers on a screen for the fun of it.
No, definitely not. And the psychology here is arguably the most important insight in the text.
Yeah.
The highest possible dividend money can pay, the absolute peak return on investment, is control over your time.
It's the ability to wake up every morning and say, I can do whatever I want today with whoever I want for as long as I want.
Which is huge. Research consistently shows that autonomy provides humans with significantly more baseline happiness than any objective material condition.
Yet that is entirely divorced from how society actually operates. We don't use money to buy time. We use it to buy status symbols.
Which leads us to the man in the car paradox.
Mm-hmm.
Walk us through the mechanics of that cognitive trap, because this one blew my mind.
Okay, so imagine you're standing on a sidewalk and someone drives past in a roaring $250,000 Ferrari.
Okay.
The paradox is that you rarely look at the driver and think, wow, that guy's amazing, I deeply respect him. Instead, you imagine yourself driving the Ferrari.
Oh, wow.
You assume that if you were in the driver's seat, everyone on the sidewalk would admire you.
So we buy flashy things to be respected, completely ignoring the fact that onlookers don't respect the owner at all. They just use the object as a measuring stick for their own fantasies of being admired.
It's a tragic, endless loop. We sacrifice our actual freedom, our time, to work jobs we hate in order to buy things that no one actually cares that we own.
And the sources bring in empirical data to back up this psychological tragedy. There's this study by Carl Pillemer. He interviewed 1,000 elderly Americans, asking them to look back on their entire lives and identify what actually mattered.
And when you ask people at the end of their lives, the illusions just drop away. Out of 1,000 people, literally 0 said that working harder to buy more stuff brought them happiness.
0.
0 said that being richer than their neighbors was the true measure of success.
It wasn't about the watch or the car. What they valued was warm friendships, being part of a larger community, and just unstructured, unhurried time with their children.
Which brings us to this brilliant, inverted definition from the text. They say, wealth is what you don't see. It defines savings simply as your income minus your ego.
Think about it like the engine block of a car. The engine is completely hidden beneath the hood. You never see it.
Right.
But it does all the heavy lifting, it generates the actual power, and it gives you the freedom to go anywhere you want. But instead of investing in a massive engine block, people are obsessed with spending all their capital on a flashy paint job.
Luxury goods.
Yeah, stuff that sits on the outside, does absolutely nothing to move you forward, but signals status to people on the sidewalk.
Now, I will push back slightly on the idea that status signaling is entirely useless.
Fair enough.
I mean, in modern society, looking successful can sometimes open doors. A nice suit or driving a nice car to a client meeting can act as a networking tool. Doesn't completely hiding your wealth put you at a disadvantage in a world that runs on perception.
It's a fair point, but I think the cost-benefit analysis is totally skewed there. You might get a meeting because of the designer suit, sure, but if that suit was bought on credit and you are terrified of missing a payment, you sacrifice your autonomy.
Yeah, that's true.
You're stressed, you're trapped, and you basically traded the engine block for the paint job.
Exactly. The social utility of the paint job doesn't outweigh the freedom of the engine block. And if the goal is genuine respect and admiration from others, the text is pretty clear that humility, kindness, and empathy will yield a vastly higher return over a lifetime than any luxury good ever could.
Wealth is the unspent money. It's the hidden option to pivot when life throws a curveball.
And to build that unseen wealth and protect the engine block, we have to shield ourselves from the unknown. But humans have a fatal flaw when it comes to risk assessment.
Oh, do we ever?
We look to the past to predict a future that has literally never happened.
We treat history as a definitive map of the future because it gives us psychological comfort, right? Engineers and analysts just crave data.
They do. But the sources provide 2 striking examples of how dangerous this illusion of certainty is. The Fukushima nuclear disaster in 2011 and the Pharaoh's measurements of the Nile in ancient Egypt.
Thousands of years apart, and yet they made the exact same catastrophic error.
Yep. In both cases, highly intelligent engineers built their entire survival infrastructure based strictly on the absolute worst historical event on record.
Right.
The scribes of the pharaohs marked the highest historical flood level of the Nile and designed their agriculture and cities around that maximum line. Fast forward to modern Japan, the designers of Fukushima looked at the worst historical earthquake data on record and built seawalls to withstand exactly that magnitude.
They lacked the imagination to realize that the worst event in history was, at one point, completely unprecedented.
Right.
mean, history is a record of what has happened, not a limit on what could happen.
Exactly. That bureaucratic failure to imagine the unprecedented is why relying purely on historical data is a trap. As the text warns, the four most dangerous words in investing are, "It's different this time."
History is fantastic for teaching us generalities, like how humans react in a panic or how greed inflates a bubble. But it is entirely useless at predicting specific market crashes or black swan events.
So if we can't predict the future, and we can't rely on the worst-case scenarios of the past, how do we engineer our survival?
By building a massive margin of error, often called a margin of safety,
Right.
and this isn't just about playing it safe or being overly conservative, it is a mathematical strategy to increase your overall survival rate. It's acknowledging that your forecast will likely be wrong, and ensuring that when you are wrong, you don't get wiped out of the game entirely.
And a massive part of maintaining that margin of error is psychological. It's knowing when to stop moving the goalposts, because the comparison game just destroys margins of error.
Let's dig into why our biology forces us into that comparison game. Evolutionarily, status within a small tribe meant survival.
Yeah, if you're at the bottom of the hierarchy, you didn't get food and you didn't reproduce.
Right. So we are biologically hardwired to constantly compare our resources to our neighbors to ensure our survival.
But today, our tribe isn't 50 people in a cave. It's the entire internet. The text uses the example of a rookie baseball player making $500,000 a year. Objectively, that rookie is in the top fraction of a percent of global wealth.
Oh, for sure.
But he shares a locker room with Mike Trout, who has a $430 million contract.
Yeah, that's a tough comparison.
Right. Because of our tribal biology, the rookie looks at Mike Trout, feels penniless, and takes unnecessary risks to catch up.
The sources bluntly state that the only way to win the comparison game is simply not to play it. You must define what enough is for you.
If your definition of success relies on out-earning your peers, you will never stop running. And in that endless running, you will inevitably take a risk that destroys your margin of error and wipes you out.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This brings us to a major paradigm shift in the text about how we handle the inevitable moments when things do go wrong. When the market drops 20% or inflation spikes, we need to understand the difference between fees and fines.
This completely rewires how you experience volatility. Usually when our portfolio drops, our brain interprets it as a fine, a penalty.
A sign that we did something wrong.
Exactly. We think we made a mistake, and now we're being punished by the market.
Like getting a speeding ticket. It means you broke a rule and you need to change your behavior.
Right. If you view a market downturn as a fine, your instinct is to avoid it, so you panic, sell everything, and run away.
But the text argues we need to view volatility as a fee. It is simply the price of admission for long-term growth.
When you go to a theme park, you pay an entrance fee. You don't view the ticket price as a punishment for showing up.
Right, it's just the cost of admission.
Exactly. In finance, you have to pay the fee of emotional discomfort and uncertainty to get the historical returns of the market. It's not a penalty, it's just the cost of doing business.
If you view it as a fee, you pay it, and you stay in the park.
This raises an important question, though. It's the ultimate litmus test for any financial strategy. Are you investing so you can maximize your spreadsheet, or are you investing so you can sleep well at night?
That is the big one.
Because if your mathematically perfect optimized strategy keeps you awake at night in a cold sweat every time the market dips, your margin of error is too small. Full stop.
Your strategy has to align with your psychology, or your psychology will eventually break under pressure and force you to make a terrible decision at the worst possible time.
We started this deep dive looking at a humble janitor who somehow manages to beat a Wall Street financial whiz. And now, the mechanics of that victory make total sense.
They really do. The janitor didn't need to be a math genius or build a supercomputer. They just needed to master their own behavior.
They understood that their ancient biological hardware was poorly suited for a modern casino.
They allowed time to act as their ice age, letting tiny flakes of compounding build into massive results without interrupting the process.
They kept their ego in check, building that unseen wealth, focusing on the engine block instead of buying the shiny paint job.
And when the market inevitably plunged, they treated the chaos as a fee they happily paid, rather than a fine they ran from.
Above all, they survived. They defined their own version of enough, and they stuck around long enough to let the math work in their favor.
The sources ultimately urge us to figure out exactly what game we are playing. So as we wrap up, I want you to think about the financial stress you felt this past week. Just hold it in your mind. Were you stressing over the rules of your game, the game of building unseen wealth to buy back your own time and autonomy? Or were you accidentally playing someone else's game, exhausting yourself to buy a flashy paint job for a car that no one is actually looking at?
That's the real question.
The only way to win is to know which game is yours. Until next time, thanks for diving deep with us.